Arteza very kindly offered to send me some more art supplies to review on my channel, and on top of that, they also offered to host a giveaway through my channel. I decided to choose the 60 set of Everblend markers that I'll be reviewing in this video for the giveaway product, because personally I really enjoyed working with a couple sets of Everblend markers that I reviewed in the past. I don't trust myself to articulate and explain the giveaway rules and entry method through my voiceover just in case I miss something or misspeak, so please check out the description box below for everything you need to do in order to enter the giveaway for the set of markers. With all that being said, let's get into the products that they sent me this time around. First and foremost, they sent me this set of 2 square sketchbooks that measure 8.25 inches in either direction, and the cover of the sketchbooks is very similar to the watercolor sketchbooks that I've shown previously on my channel. It has the same linen cover to them. The sketchbooks also have 110-pound paper that has a good amount of texture to them, but at the same time, something I noticed upon immediately feeling the paper is that it does have this strange, almost fabric-y feeling to the surface, even though it's not actually cotton paper. The sketchbook is also advertised as mixed media, but their website specifies it's intended for use with dry media. Obviously though, as someone who very frequently works with watercolor and wet media as a whole, I really wanted to test that in this sketchbook to see how it held up, and spoiler alert, it actually did a really good job holding up watercolors. And as you've probably seen, the sketchbook also has really nice features like a pocket in the back of the sketchbook, a red ribbon to mark your place, and an elastic band to hold everything in place. The next thing they sent me was this 48 set of Twimarkers that Arteza carries. These are water-based markers that pretty much one end has a brush nib and the other has a very small, bullet nib, but it's so thin that it's very similar to a fine liner nib. These markers do visually look a little bit strange because they kind of remind me of a gel pen or some kind of highlighter is what they'd look like, but they're just water-based pens, very similar in my mind, at least physically, and what they do to the Tombow dual brush pens. However, the nib sizes are completely different from the Tombow pens, as you can see. And last but not least, the thing I was most excited for was this 60 set of Arteza Everblend markers. If you saw my previous Arteza review, they did send me 2 of the 36 sets. I got their skin tone set as well as their gray set, and I absolutely loved these markers. I haven't really tried anything except for Copics and a couple of other brands here and there that I've tried 1 or 2 markers of, but the Everblend markers honestly blew me away, so I was really excited to get the chance to try a bigger color range of these markers with a lot more just colors in general, because while the skin tone and the gray sets were absolutely amazing and they were excellent at what they were, I was really looking forward to trying a larger selection of these markers. As you can see, this set does come with a carrying case. It's really nice and sturdy. It also comes with a strap that you can use for travel. While this case is very nice for travel, it's not the most convenient for at-home use, I would say, but we'll get more into that later. As you can see, it has Velcro in a lot of places. It closes by Velcroing and strapping down, and then there's Velcro on the sides to open it up. It's really nice because it has all these different dividers in there. Everything is in there extremely securely, and it also has a good amount of slots for extra markers in case you want to put other pens in there. If you buy any other markers, any other brands of markers would fit in there really well. If you didn't see my other video, or if you're just unfamiliar with these markers as a whole, they have a chisel end on one side and the other one is a bullet nib, and they're also really cool because they have a different sized and shaped body from normal markers. Instead of being circular or ovular, these are triangular markers. And of course, they have the color codes on one side. Something that I was nitpicky of about my markers in my previous video is that they don't have a color name on the body. This isn't necessarily an essential thing to do with the markers, but as far as the physical appearance of the markers go, that's probably one of the biggest things I have. As I mentioned in my other video though, it does seem like that the color codes that are on the caps of these markers will come off with some wear and tear, so that's just something to take into consideration. And this is everything that Arteza sent me this time. So of course the first thing I had to do is go ahead and swatch all of these new pens, which was a lot to do, but I really like swatching. I find a lot of enjoyment in swatching, so for me, this was very exciting. As far as swatching the Twimarkers goes, this set comes with a huge selection of vibrant colors. This set in particular has some pros and cons to it as far as the color range goes, because while you are getting a really nice selection of rainbow colors, most of them are really vibrant, which can cause some problems when it comes to value and just blending to a lighter color as a whole. From what I've seen, a lot of people use these pens for calligraphy because of the brush pen though, so it really just depends on what you're using them for. But like I said, a really good color selection, but there can be some faults to what they've given us at the same time. As a whole though, all of my markers were really juicy, beautiful colors, and really fun to swatch. And when it comes to the Everblend markers, they give you a gorgeous selection of colors within this set. Something that I've noticed a lot when it comes to more budget-friendly alcohol markers is that sets tend to lean towards more vibrant colors versus pastel colors, and this set isn't really any kind of exception to that. While this can get in the way of certain uses for these markers, they still do a really good job of setting you up with a beautiful range of blendable colors. While the strongest part of this set is definitely the rainbow colors, they also throw in some grays as well as a small selection of skin tones, which is really nice because that makes this set of markers a really good starting point for someone who is wanting to start a collection of alcohol markers, because you can pretty much get this set and be set for a really long time. Arteza does also offer bigger sets of their alcohol markers, but I know alcohol markers are expensive, and this is honestly such an amazing starting point, especially if you don't own any alcohol markers. As you can see, you can also stand the case up too on your desk, which is really nice and makes it convenient because you can see all of the markers. Here are some of the pieces that I made using these supplies off camera. I mainly wanted to show them because I really didn't get to show off the Twimarkers as much as I would have liked in this video. It was already long and I didn't want to include another illustration, so most of these drawings were done solely with the Twimarkers, so I got a good amount of use out of them, and then the last one was done with the Everblend markers on their own. For the drawings I did with the Everblend markers for this video, I tried my best to show off the color selection that comes with the 60 set of markers. And because I've already done a video showcasing the skin tone set, I kind of had to force myself to stray away from using a more realistic skin tone for this girl I drew, which resulted in me making her skin blue. I tried to mentally plan this one out before going in and coloring, which is honestly something that I hardly ever do, but my main goal was to use a decent selection of the markers to, like I said before, show off the color range within this set. My initial plan was actually to go in with the Twimarkers and add some final details with those, but I ended up having a really fun time using the Everblend markers, so I was just kind of in the zone and honestly forgot to do so this was completely done with the Everblend markers. I also know brush nibs are something that are really sought after when it comes to using alcohol markers, which I completely understand because brush nibs do make it really easy to blend stuff, but when it comes to alcohol markers, brush nibs tend to raise the price so much, and honestly, even in using these markers, it's not a detrimental thing at all to have a chisel nib and a bullet nib instead of a brush nib. It's actually really nice because the bullet nib comes in handy in so many situations, so it's just a really simple learning curve. As someone who's used to working with markers with a brush nib, having a bullet nib instead really does not ruin things for me. It's actually really convenient, like I said, to have that bullet nib because you can do a lot of line work very easily, which is what I ended up doing, and I really like working with markers this way because I used to use markers in a way where I would do line art with a fine liner or something beforehand and then color it, but I personally love the look of colored line work, and being able to easily do it with a bullet nib and not having to worry about pressure on my hand like I would with a brush nib, very nice to work with. Something that this set of markers comes with that I've actually never ever used or owned before is a colorless blender. And if you don't know what that is or you haven't used one yourself, it's basically a marker that only has alcohol in it and no kind of color, pigment, whatever they use in alcohol markers for colors. But the point is basically to help blend together alcohol markers. I played around with using the colorless blender when I was swatching the set of markers at the beginning, and honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of what it was doing to the initial layers of marker because it kind of just looked like it was lifting the color of what was already laid down on the page and making my previous strokes appear fuzzy on the paper. I don't really know if it was just the paper in this sketchbook responding weirdly to the colorless blender or if that's what colorless blenders do, but from my experience, I was pretty turned off from it honestly. But it actually came in handy for blending out the edges of the blue on her face, where I wanted the color to blend out into the actual whites of the paper. But by no means was it like a saving grace, because it didn't seamlessly blend it by any means, but it did a fairly good job to buffer the edge to a point where I was happy with the outcome. Realistically, I should have played around with how the colorless blender laid down on other types of paper, but I actually didn't think about that until just now, so whoops. I know that this paper is by no means the best for alcohol markers though, because like I mentioned before, it does have some weird fabric-y feel to the surface, and I think that really impacts how the alcohol markers lay down. They don't perform horribly on this paper by any means, like it still looks really good on this paper, but I did find that alcohol markers kind of bleed outwards the smallest amount, which is something that's important to note in case you are very particular about how your supplies work in sketchbooks. This does have a weird Sketchbook is weird. It's really hard for me to review sketchbooks because I feel like my opinion changes so much between the time I initially used the sketchbook to the time I am finished with the sketchbook. So it's really hard for me to be like, I like the sketchbook or I don't like the sketchbook until I'm done with it, because my opinion tends to change so much in that time frame. And of course, I had to see how watercolors performed in the sketchbook. I'm using my own custom watercolors. These are a mixture of Daniel Smith, Engrams, and I think that's it. Yeah, it's just Daniel Smith and Engrams. But I really wanted to see how watercolors performed in the sketchbook, and honestly, I was really impressed with how well this paper did. It lifts really well. It's not too easy, but it is a lot easier than the Arteza watercolor sketchbook. I found that that sketchbook did not want to lift at all. And this sketchbook, it lifts very easily without being too easy. The colors lay down really nicely. The paper does buckle, but it's not an amount by any means that I dislike. If anything, I really like the amount it buckles. Mentioned in my last video, I've been really enjoying buckling on paper that isn't necessarily super heavyweight, but this actually does a really good job holding watercolors. I was very impressed with it. I didn't find that it bled like the alcohol markers did, in the sense that it bled outwards, not through the page, obviously, but like, I don't know, I was really impressed with how well watercolors worked on this paper. And then I wanted to go ahead and use the Twimarkers a bit because I felt like they deserved at least some time in the spotlight, but I have kind of mixed feelings about the Twimarkers, honestly. They're really nice. Like I said, it's an interesting selection of colors because you don't get a lot of, not necessarily neutral colors, but dulled down colors. And that was really present when it came to lining this piece, because every time I reached for a color, I felt like it was way too bright, and initially I thought I was ruining this piece by using the Twimarkers on top. It ended up working out just fine, but it's a very vibrant selection of colors. I'm also not the biggest fan of the smaller nib on the Twimarkers, but that's just personal opinion. It's a very thin liner nib, and it's very reminiscent to me of a fine liner, which I'm not a huge fan of. So it just kind of depends on what you're using them for. I really like the brush nib that's on these markers. But that being said, I do think the brush nibs that are on these pens will start to wear down over time and overusing them and not hold the point as much. I noticed when I was doing my couple of illustrations off camera with these markers that some of the pens just did not have the same point that others did, so I don't know how long they'll hold up. I still think they'll hold up and be usable for a really long time, but that's something to make note of because it does look like they'll start to wear down over a good amount of use. I do really like the individual colors of the Twimarkers though. I don't really see myself using them on their own to create drawings, but I think for what I'd use them for, they'd really shine through for any kind of writing because the bullet nib is perfect for any kind of note-taking or writing as a whole. And I was really impressed with the lack of streakiness when it came down to laying blocks of color with these pens, because in my experience, water-based pens can provide a ton of streakiness when you're laying down color on a big area, so I was very impressed with the lack of streakiness you see in using the Twimarkers. And onto the last drawing I did with these supplies. I decided to draw a girl upside down because I recently started watching the new Madoka Magica series, the one that's like not necessarily a spin-off, but a story within the same universe. And I've honestly only seen like 3 episodes at this point, but in the ending song, there were a couple of frames of one of the characters, and it was just like a bust-up image of her, except that she was upside down, and I really liked the way it looked, and I wanted to draw something similar, so I decided to draw this girl with long hair, and I drew her technically upside down in this sketchbook, which I kind of showed at the beginning that this is actually the other side of the page versus what you think it is, so technically she's upside down, but to make it a lot less confusing for myself, obviously I am drawing her upright and I just flipped it around at the very end. I wanted to draw stars around her face and body to add something else going on within the image, and it turned into looking like she was crying stars, which I'm okay with because I think that looks really cool. I also got a weird initial desire to make this piece very cool toned, which is strange for me because I personally think I stick with warm tones a lot quicker and easier. I prefer warm tones over cool tones, but I think the reason that I initially wanted to do cool tones is because I was thinking of kind of like a galaxy space design once I added in the stars, and so it made sense to do like purples and blues for this piece, but because my other Everblend marker piece for this video is cool toned, I figured I would color her warm tone so I would be able to show off more of the markers themselves, obviously, instead of using like, the same 8 markers over again. I did also reach for a couple of the colors in the set of 36 skin tones that Arteza offers because I wanted her to have skin that was lighter than her hair. Initially, I was coloring in the skin a lot lighter, but eventually I ended up adding some of the colors that were within her hair to make her look a lot less pasty and just give more life to her face. It was really easy to blend out, even though it's a chisel nib and a bullet nib. Very easy to blend out. I really liked the way her hair ended up looking. Very pretty in my opinion. I also went in with Twimarkers near the end to help define certain areas that I felt like needed a little bit more going on. So I added some loose strands on her hair here and there, as well as define some of the sections of hair as a whole. I also used them to help sculpt out some of her facial features, especially her eyes, because I was not at all confident enough in my ability to make a super thin line with the alcohol markers. I had also planned to color the stars in with Everblend markers, but there were a couple of places near the beginning of coloring this piece where I accidentally laid color over a star, so I quickly decided I would course correct at the very end of this piece and add all the stars in with a Posca pen, which, if anything, was in my favor because that meant I didn't have to spend so much time avoiding the stars when I was coloring the hair. And of course, I went in with a white gel pen at the very end of this piece to add little highlights everywhere and also give her teeth back because somewhere in coloring the lips, I ended up completely covering her teeth, which honestly is something I tend to do a lot, so thank God for white gel pens. This drawing is easily my favorite out of the several I've shown in this video though. I wasn't sure how the hair was going to turn out because it takes up such a significant amount of the space on the page, and I never really spend a ton of time rendering hair, but I really like the finished product. I like the contrast that's shown on her neck where it blends from black to white, and I like the fact that it kind of takes the eye a minute to register that that's her neck and body and not part of the background. I think this also looks really cool being technically upside down on my sketchbook, and I'd really like to play around with similar concepts again in the future because I think this turned out really cool. I think it's very visually pretty, and I also really like the way I colored it. So, like I said, it's really hard for me to review this sketchbook because my opinion changes so heavily from beginning to end on using a sketchbook, but it's a little different. The paper texture is kind of weird, but I really like the size, the shape. The sketchbooks that Arteza puts together, they're really well put together in terms of the frame and the binding of the sketchbook. It's not going to fall apart, stuff like that. So I really like the sketchbook. The Twimarkers I also enjoyed. They're not my favorite pens, but they have many good uses. And of course, I love the Everblend markers so much. So please check out the description box below to find out how to enter the giveaway that Arteza and I are hosting to give one of you guys the same set of 60 Everblend markers. And in case you're interested in purchasing any of these products yourself, of course, those will also be linked down below. I know this video was a bit longer than my usual ones, but I had a lot of footage to show, so thank you guys so much for watching and making it this far, and I will see you in the next one.